Hi guys, in this video we are going to learn about what are states and what are props in a React component. So state of a component is an object that holds some information that may change throughout the component lifecycle. Okay, so let me show you an example first. So this is my app.js, okay, and let's create a new component inside a components directory. So I'm creating a new directory called components. I will create home.js, let's say name it as home.js, and I will go ahead and import React from React, and let's create a class-based components. In order for us to use a state, we need to use a class-based component. It won't work with the functional based component. So we need to name it as home extends React. So we need to extend the component class of React, okay, and inside of this we'll use render method, because if we're using class-based component then we need to use render method. If it was functional then we didn't have to. Okay, and let's just say it returns some div. Okay, so a render method should return some React element. Okay, so what you see over here, these are React elements. React calls them elements. Okay, so this is home. Okay, let's just alright, and let's just export this so that it's available to the outside world. Export default home, and now we can just import it inside of our main component, which is app.js. So I'll just say home. Okay, and we have just imported it, right? If we don't have to write anything inside of this, then we can just use a closing tag. If we had to write something inside of this, then we'll probably use like this. And it's important to note that when you are actually going ahead and creating the components, the first letter should be capital, guys. Otherwise the JSX will treat that as an HTML tag. So if you write this like home instead of home, then JSX will think that it's an HTML tag, and when it's creating an element, it'll pass that as a string. Okay, so make sure that if you are creating a component, it needs to start with the capital letter. Okay, great. So coming back over here, so if we want to define state, we need to add a method called constructor. Okay, and it accepts a parameter called props, and then you need to use super and then props. So what we are doing over here is basically we are overriding the parent component class constructor by defining the constructor again, and we are using super props over here, because if we don't use this then we won't have the props available. What are props? Props are basically properties, and props are also objects. Props are inputs that are passed to the components. Okay, so if we have a component, for example this one home component, and if we are passing some data, if we want to pass some data, we can actually pass it like over here. So I can just say name, and I can use string also, and if I want to put an object, like if we had some object over here, for example let's say const my name run, I can use my name over here. So basically this curly braces actually evaluates whatever is inside of this. If it was a method, it evaluates. If it is a variable or a constant, it evaluates the value and returns the value, and that will be the value of name over here. So we can actually pass props, which are properties, which are objects, from parent class component, from parent component to child component. So app is the parent component of home, home is child component, and we can pass this data like this. And if we want the data to be available, if we want this dot props to be available, then we need to use the super props over here. We could also pass the props directly into a functional component. So for example, if we had a functional component, let's say we say nav we name it as nav, and we say function. Okay, just say export default, and we name it as nav is equal to, I'm using arrow function. I can pass props over here. Okay, and it should return a div, and I can say my name is, I'm gonna just use the value of props like this dot props over here. Okay, and I can just say const over here. So const, so this is a function basically, and then I can just export this function, export default nav, so it's available to the outside world, and I can just import it. Okay, so if you're using functional based components, then definitely you don't need to define constructor, because you don't you won't be using the first of all, it won't be a class based component, so you don't require a constructor over there. Props will directly be available like this. But if you are going to use a class based component, then you need to use super props so that this dot props is available. So now if I check right here, this dot props dot name, because remember we have a name passed over here. We're going back, we have name passed over here. Okay, so now if I go back and check, you can see this is home Imran, right? And even for the other one that we have created, we can just import the other component here as well in the parent component. You can just say nav, and we can pass name, and we can pass like a string also, like for example, what do I name it as? Sean. Okay, we need to define React. We missed that. We need to import React over here. Import React from React. Now check. Props of undefined. Okay, I need to, instead of this dot props, guys, we will directly have props available on top, so we can just use it like this. Okay, so now you can see that if you go back to parent component, we have home component, and we are passing name as props, my name as props, and the value will be available inside of this dot props dot name, which is here. Okay, and we have this displayed over here, and similarly we have the another component which is a nav component, and we are passing props Sean inside of name. And if you go to nav component, this is our functional component, we have props available inside of this, and we can just use it like this, props.name. Okay, so basically props are inputs to component. If we have a parent component, if I want to pass some data to the child component, I can do that using props. So both states and props are objects. Okay, props are single values or objects containing a set of values that are passed to the components on creation using a naming convention similar to the HTML tag attribute. Okay, so it's similar to HTML tag attribute. Okay, and you can also pass entire objects also, guys. So if you want to pass like say, I will say data, and I can say URL, and I can pass data, entire data over here like this. Okay, I can name this something else also. If I can say my data. Okay, now if I want to have an access of this data inside of home, I can do that using this dot props. Okay, so this dot props dot my data will be equal to this entire data inside of my child component over here. Okay, so I can say, I can just put h4 tag, oh sorry, I can do an a tag actually over here. Okay, href, and I can say this dot props dot my data, I think it was my data dot URL. Okay, and I'll just use a closing tag. Okay. Go to Google, and now let's check. Great. So if you do an inspect element, you can see we have this value over here. Why? Because we have passed that as props, right? Okay, great. Now we have been talking about props, guys. Now let's talk about state. Okay, so inside of constructor, if I want to define a state, I can just say this dot state is equal to I can say name, or I can say something else. Let's say the job title. Okay, so I can initialize a state over here. Okay, if I want to go ahead and use it later on, I can initialize a state over here, and then I can use it right here. So I can put a p tag, my job title, and then if I want to use this state value, I can just do this dot state dot job title. Okay, so currently it won't display anything because there is nothing inside of the state job title property, but if I want to go ahead and set that, I can do that actually. Okay, so let's do that. Let's create a button. Okay, and the job of which will be to set the job title. Set job title. Okay, and then I can put an on-click event over here, and I can create a method on top. This time we'll use ES5 function. Okay, and this will say handle on click. Handle on click button. Okay, in fact we don't need function over here. Okay, and now we can do this. So if I want to change the state, I can do this dot set state, and it takes the state. I can say job title, and I can say web developer. Okay, so the job of the set state will be to set the state where it will change the value of job title to web developer when the button is clicked. Okay, so I need to call this method over here. So this dot handle click button. So now if I check, I have set job title. If I click on it, then okay, what is going on? Set state of undefined. The reason for this is, guys, it's because this that we are using over here is actually pointing to this function. It is not pointing to the class. We need this to point to the class. So there are two ways that we can do it. The first way, we can bind this. So we can say this dot bind this, and now if I check and click on this, you can see now it's working, right? So now this has been bind to the class this. Okay, so it's referring to the class now. Or what we can do is, instead of doing this here, we can say this dot handle on click button is equal to this dot handle on click button dot bind this. Okay, so we know that in ES6 the functions this actually refers to their method. So this is referring to this method basically. That's why when we are trying to set the state, we basically need the class over here in this. We are not able to get that. That's why I need to use bind this. This is the problem that was solved by ES6 arrow functions. So arrow functions don't bind this. So if I go ahead and use arrow function, so all I have to do is just put like this. Okay, and then I don't have to go ahead and bind this. So let's try that. So now this will not refer to this method, it will refer to the parent class. Let's try that. You can click now, it's working. Great, awesome. Now what you can also do is you can just add a Chrome developer tool for yourself, okay, which will be, I'll just show you, React, okay, and here you'll be able to see your component, okay. So if I just search home over here, I can check home component. I can see that I have props over here, I have state, so you can see your state, you can see your props right here, okay, and you can immediately see what's happening with your state and props when you make changes. So if I refresh the page, okay, you have your application, you have app component, then inside of this you have home, then you have nav. That's exactly what we have defined here, right? So you have your app component, inside of it you have your home and nav, right? So home has props, which is my data and name, okay, and then inside of my data you have your URL available, which is this, right? So you can see all of that data over here. Similarly in nav component you have your props, which is being passed, name is equal to Sean, okay. And coming back to home component, so currently you can see the state job title it's initialized and the value is empty currently, because when we have defined this in constructor we have initialized our state, the value is empty currently. But if I click on this, you can see the value is now changed because we have gone ahead and add an event over here on this button saying that when this button is clicked, go ahead and use a setState method that React provides us, and go ahead and set the state value of job title to web developer. So the moment you click the button, it goes in and do that, okay. Now I want to actually show you, how does this work visually, okay. So as we have already discussed in a previous video, that React goes ahead and creates two copies of the DOM as virtual DOM. These are virtual representation of the DOM. So we have a real DOM and then it creates two copies, which is virtual DOM. The reason it does that is so that whenever there is a change, it goes ahead and compares the changed copy with the other copy, and if whatever the change is, it goes ahead and updates the real DOM with that. So React creates these two copies, and then we define initial state in our component, in our class-based component, okay, and which we have just shown you right now, okay. And then whenever an event is triggered, whenever for example a button was clicked, we go ahead and call the method setState. So we go ahead and change the state, change the initial state. So once the initial state is changed, it goes ahead and calls the render method, and when it calls the render method goes ahead and puts all the changes, renders all those changes into one of the copies that it had created in the virtual DOM representation of the DOM, and it checks what is the difference. It compares the two, the previous one of the copies and the one which is re-rendered it, and it compares those, and whatever the changes, it goes ahead and updates in the real DOM. That's why you were able to see the value of job title as web developer when it was rendered, okay. So coming back, once again a recap, we go ahead and initialize the state. Okay, we initialize the state, an event is triggered, we change the state. Once the state is changed, it calls the render method. So it's a rule, guys, whenever state is changed, it will always call the render method. Whether it happens 1 time, 2 times, 3 times, it will call the render method. There could be possibilities that React may club these things together, club two set states together also, okay. So you should not actually depend on the set state if you want to perform any actions after that. So I will show you in a moment how you can do that, but React can club multiple set states together for performance, okay. So render method is called, and then it compares these two virtual DOM representation copies. The reason it does that is because it doesn't do the DOM query, as DOM query is expensive. It goes ahead and compares one of the copies with the other, okay, and when it sees the change, it goes and updates the real DOM with that change. Okay. So guys, let's recap. So what is a component state? A state of a component is an object that holds some information that may change throughout the component lifecycle. We define initial state, and then we just have to notify that the state is changed, and React will automatically render those changes on the front end behind the scenes. Okay, by going ahead and first rendering those changes on the virtual DOM, comparing it with the first copy, and what are the changes, it goes and updates that in the real DOM. Okay, so that's all it is to React, guys. It's just state management, and that's what makes React really simple, because you just have to manage your states and props. And every time the state changes, the changes get re-rendered on the UI front end. Changes automatically, as is just explained to you. It goes and updates that on the virtual DOM and compares it, and then updates the real DOM. Okay, so what are props? Props are inputs to the components. They provide you a way to pass the data from a parent component to a child component. These are single values or objects containing a set of values, or containing a set of values that are passed to components on creation using a naming convention similar to HTML tag attributes. They are used to pass custom data to your components or trigger state changes. Okay. There are important points to be noted, guys, when we are dealing with state, that React may batch multiple setState calls into a single update for performance. So as I just explained to you a while ago, that if you have multiple setStates that you're doing in different components, it might batch them together for performance. Okay, because this.props and this.state may be updated asynchronously, you should not rely on their values for calculating the next state. Okay, so I'll explain to you in a moment how you can actually do that. And state is local or encapsulated. So state is a private property of a component, guys. It is not accessible to any other component other than the one it owns it and sets it. So if you want to pass state value to your child component, you need to pass them as props. The child component won't have an idea, what is the state information of its parent component. So we can only pass it using props. So a component may choose to pass its state down as props to its child component. And data is actually the data that flows from parent to child components is going from top to down, guys. Okay, so imagine a component tree as a waterfall of props, and the component states is like an additional water source that joins it at an arbitrary point but also flows down. Okay, so data actually flows from top to bottom in React component tree. Okay, so what are the differences between state and props? Props, which are properties, and states, both are JavaScript objects. Props are like arguments of a function, and state are like local variables inside of the function. So if you take an example of a function, you can think of the props as parameters, okay, which don't change, okay, and you can think of the local variables like state, which can be changed. So props is passed by parent to the child component, and a component should never modify its own props. State is managed within a component for internal communication. Like I said, state is like a private property for a component. If you want to pass it to the child component, you need to pass it as props. And state can be modified using setState, and then when the value of state changes, render method is called. So every time the state changes, render is called. Okay, so you have to ensure that do not call the setState inside of the render method, guys, otherwise it will go into an infinite loop. Because if you call setState into render method, is going to set the state, which in turn will call render method, again it will set the state, again it will call the render method, and this will go on and on. So your system might freeze. So these are the main differences between the props and state. Okay, modified. So now if I come over here and try to modify the props, if I say this dot props dot name is equal to Ryan, let's see what happens. Okay, you have some error, and it says cannot assign to the read-only property name of an object. So think of props as a read-only property. If you come over here in the React documentation of components and props, you will see props are read-only. Whether you declare a component as a function or a class, it must never modify its own props. So consider this example, this function guys, which takes parameter a and b and returns a and b. So such functions are called pure because they do not attempt to change their inputs and always return the same results, same inputs. Okay. However, in contrast, the below function is impure because it changes its own input. It's saying account.total minus equal to amount. Okay, so it's actually changing its own input. So React is pretty flexible, guys, as it has a strict single strict rule that all React components must act as pure functions with respect to their props, which means it should not modify its own props. So that's something that's important to consider. Okay, just a while back I explained to you that there could be multiple set state that could happen, and React might update them as batches. Okay, so if you want to go ahead and use props, if you want to go ahead and add that, don't be dependent on set state. You also have an option of a fallback function. For example, you can add this as the next parameter as a callback function. Okay, I can use arrow function instead. Okay, so why do we have this callback? Because when you do set state, guys, it does not guarantee us that state will be set at that time. Okay, so if we want to do something else after the state is set, we can do that inside of the callback function. So I can just do console log console1. Okay, now the state is set. Okay, so let's just check. First I'll get rid of this props of name. Okay, let's check. Okay, let's click on this. You can see you're getting now the state is set. Okay, so you can do that. And also if you want to access props, there's a different way to use the set state also. So it also accepts a function. So I can do this dot set state, and instead of putting the value like job title over here, you can also pass a function. So I can use arrow function. Okay, and then it gives me access to two parameters. One is state, and then I'll have props available here as well. Okay, and then you can just return. I can return an object, and I can say that job title will be equal to this dot props dot name. In fact, I don't have to use this dot props because I have props available and state available. So state dot job title, let's say plus, I use this props dot name. Okay, and let's say I put job title as web developer. Okay, and I'll just change that props dot name. And what you can do is you can use backticks, guys, instead of concatenating it. Okay, so it'll be displaying my name, none is and then it's going to give me access to state also, state dot job title, and then close the backtick. Okay, so what this will evaluate to, because I'm getting an access to props which is being passed from the parent. Okay, so I have parent and I have Imran being passed over here in the props. So I have props.name available as Imran because that's what is being passed here in the home, inside of the home component. And we have access to the state available as well. So we have defined the initial state as web developer, so that's what will be displayed. Let's get rid of all of this. to make it a little clean. Okay, and let's just change this to new data. Okay, and then just put new data over here. Right, now if I go back and if I check, if I click on this button, what will happen is it'll go ahead and do the set state, and it will set the value of new data to this, and then this will be displayed. Okay, so if I click on this, sure enough you can see that now the state value is Imran is a web developer. If you want to see that in action, again refresh, check your Chrome extension of React, and you can search home component like this. So currently inside of state I have job title, which is web developer, new data, which is nothing, and if I click on the button you can see that Imran is a web developer. That's reflecting here because that's what we've set. Okay guys, so I hope that helps. If you have any questions guys, you can leave in the comment box. If you did like my video, you can leave a thumbs up, do subscribe to my channel if you aren't already, and I will see you in the next video. Take care guys, bye bye.